I had already picked out my earrings when Rosalind grabbed my arm and pulled me into the coat closet. Not gently either. She grabbed me the way you grab someone who's about to step into traffic. "Don't make a sound," she whispered, pressing the door almost shut, leaving just a thin slice of light. "You need to hear this." I didn't argue. Rosalind had worked for me for 11 years. She had seen me through my husband's funeral, through the year I stopped cooking entirely, through the slow, quiet business of learning how to be a person alone. She had never once asked me for anything I wasn't offering. So when she said, "Don't make a sound," I didn't make a sound. I stood in the dark between a wool coat that still smelled faintly like my husband and a row of umbrellas I never used, and I listened. My son's voice came first. "She's not going to notice. You know how she is at these things. She gets emotional. She stops paying attention to details." Then, my daughter-in-law. "The notary is already confirmed for Thursday. I just need you to keep her calm until then. 2 more days." A pause. "What about the other account?" my son asked. "That's what the secondary form covers. The attorney said if we get the primary POA signed first, the rest follows automatically. She won't even need to be present for the transfers." I put my hand over my mouth. They were in the sunroom, maybe 20 feet away from where I was standing. I could hear them clearly through the old walls of this house, the house I had lived in for 31 years. The house my husband and I had picked out from a listing on a Sunday afternoon because it had a magnolia tree in the front yard and he'd said, quietly, that it reminded him of his grandmother's. I had made deviled eggs that morning. I had ironed my good blouse. I had been so happy that my son and his wife had come for my 65th birthday party that I'd stood at the kitchen window watching their car pull in and actually pressed my hand to my chest like someone in a movie. That was 2 hours ago. Rosalind's hand found mine in the dark and held it. She had overheard them earlier, she told me later. She'd been carrying a tray of glasses through the hallway when she caught enough of their conversation to stop walking. She'd stood still long enough to understand what she was hearing. And then, instead of pretending she hadn't heard, instead of quietly carrying her tray back to the kitchen and minding her own business the way most people would have, she'd gone looking for me. She found me upstairs, touching up my lipstick before heading back down to my own party. She hadn't explained anything. There hadn't been time, and she'd known that if she told me outright, I might have walked straight into that room and said something I couldn't take back. So she'd simply taken my hand and guided me downstairs and into the closet, whispering only, "Wait and listen. And please, don't make a sound." That was Rosalind. In the sunroom, my son and his wife kept talking. "Does she have any idea that you've already spoken to a buyer for the property in Ashfield?" "Of course not. She doesn't even know I know about it. Dad kept all of that separate." A low sound, my daughter-in-law setting something down on the glass table, a cup maybe. "The account in Ashfield alone is worth doing this for. The rest is it's just tidying up." Tidying up. I had given my son a good life, a quiet, careful, well-organized good life. I had worked for 22 years as an office administrator at a regional hospital, and my husband had worked in insurance, and we had not been wealthy, but we had been careful, and we had put money away in places I thought were private. The property in Ashfield had been left to me specifically by my husband's mother, who had disliked my son's wife from the first time she'd met her at Thanksgiving, and had said so to me in a Christmas card that I'd kept in the back of my desk drawer ever since. His grandmother had known something I hadn't wanted to see. In the closet, I became aware that I was gripping Rosalind's hand hard enough to hurt her. She didn't pull away. "What about Cecilia?" my son said. "My daughter. My younger child who lived in Portland and called me every Sunday without fail, who had driven 14 hours straight when my husband died because she couldn't get a flight fast enough, who had cried harder at the funeral than anyone and then stayed an extra week just to make sure I was eating." "She's not a problem," my daughter-in-law said. "She's 3,000 miles away, and she doesn't know what he left separately. By the time she figures out the numbers, it'll already be done." By the time she figures out the numbers. I thought about Cecilia sitting at her kitchen table in Portland on a Sunday morning, calling me, and me having to tell her what had been done, what I had let be done, what I had been standing 10 feet away from and hadn't stopped. Something settled in me then, something cold and very quiet. The party was still going on around us. I could hear the murmur of other guests in the living room, someone laughing near the back porch. The sound of music turned low. I had 20 people in my house celebrating a birthday I had been genuinely looking forward to. And I was standing in a coat closet holding my housekeeper's hand, listening to my son plan how to take everything my husband had spent his life building. I don't know how long we stood there, long enough for me to stop shaking, long enough to hear my son say, "Thursday then," and his wife say, "Thursday," and then the sound of them standing, chairs scraping on the sunroom floor, the distinct noise of people who believed they were alone. Rosalind eased the closet door open slowly, checking the hallway. "Clear," she whispered. We slipped out. She walked ahead of me toward the kitchen, and I followed her, and she poured me a glass of water without being asked and set it on the counter in front of me and waited. I drank all of it. "How much did you hear?" I asked her. "Enough," she said. "I heard the word notary. I heard power of attorney. I heard the Ashfield account mentioned twice." She paused. "I'm sorry." I looked at her. She was 62 years old, 5'2", with reading glasses she wore pushed up on her head even when she wasn't reading. She had a daughter in Columbus and a garden she talked about on Monday mornings. She had worked in this house longer than my son had been married. "Don't be sorry," I said. "You saved me." She didn't say anything to that. She just refilled my water glass. I went back to my party. I smiled. I cut the cake. I thanked people for coming and accepted their cards and laughed at the right moments and gave no sign whatsoever of what I now knew. My son hugged me at the end of the night and told me he was glad I'd had a good birthday, and I hugged him back, and I said I was glad too. I was very good at being composed. My husband used to say that about me. He said it as a compliment most of the time. That night, after everyone had left and Rosalind had gone home and the house was quiet, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I thought about calling Cecilia. I thought about calling her back then and telling her everything, just picking up the phone at 11 o'clock at night and saying, "Your brother is planning something, I need you." I didn't, not that night. What I did instead was find the business card I had been keeping in the kitchen drawer for over a year, given to me by my husband's attorney after the funeral, with a handwritten note clipped to it that said, "Call if anything feels off." His name was not Patricia. It was Theodore Marsh, and he had known my husband for 20 years, and when I had asked him at the time what "anything feels off" meant, he'd said, "You'll know." I called him the next morning, 8:15. I apologized for the early hour. He said, "Don't apologize, tell me everything." I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment afterward. Not the quiet of someone surprised, but the quiet of someone thinking carefully about what to say first. "Has anyone presented you with any documents to sign?" "Not yet. They've scheduled a notary for Thursday." "Okay." Another pause. "I need you to do nothing until you hear from me. No conversations with your son about finances. No signatures on anything for any reason. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good. I'll call you by end of day." He called at 4:30. He had already made inquiries. The power of attorney form my son had commissioned was sweeping. It would have given him authority over not just my financial accounts, but my healthcare decisions, my ability to enter contracts, my right to manage the property in Ashfield. It had been drawn up quietly through an attorney my son had found on his own, and the language was specifically designed to be difficult to reverse once signed. "This is not a routine estate planning document," Theodore said. "Whoever drafted this was being thorough on purpose." "What do I do?" "First, we make sure your existing will and trust structure is airtight. Your husband set up a trust before he died. It's already somewhat protected, but there are a few amendments I'd recommend to close any remaining gaps." He paused. "Second, I'd strongly suggest a conversation with your daughter. She should know what's been attempted." "She's in Portland." "I know. Call her anyway." I called Cecilia that evening. I sat on the back porch with the lights off, watching the magnolia tree move in the dark, and I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which was harder for her than it sounds. When I finished, there was a long silence. "How long?" she said. "How long has he been planning this?" "I don't know." "Mom," her voice broke slightly. She caught it. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "You don't have anything to be sorry for. Are you okay?" I thought about it honestly. "I'm angry," I said. "I'm very angry, but I'm okay." "I'm coming." "You don't have to." "I'm coming Thursday. I'll be there before the notary." She was. She drove through the night and arrived at my door at 6 in the morning with a bag over her shoulder and 2 cups of gas station coffee. And she handed me one without a word, and I let her in, and we sat at the kitchen table together and waited. When my son arrived at 11, he found me sitting with his sister, Theodore Marsh's card on the table in front of me, and a very short sentence ready. "I know what you've been planning," I said, "and I want you to leave." What happened next? The arguments, the denials, the eventual silence that came down like a door closing, is not something I want to spend much time on here. Some things don't need to be described in detail to be understood. My son left. His wife said things I will remember for a long time. Cecilia said nothing, which was more effective than anything words could have done. Theodore finalized the trust amendments the following week. The property in Ashfield was moved into a structure that could not be accessed or transferred without my signature and Cecilia's acknowledgement. Every account my husband had carefully built was protected. And then I called Rosalind. I told her what had happened. I told her about Thursday, about Theodore, about Cecilia's drive through the night. She listened quietly. "I'm glad it worked out," she said. "It worked out because of you," I said. "I need you to understand that. None of it happens without what you did." She was quiet for a moment. "You would have figured it out eventually." "Maybe, but not in time." I had already spoken with Theodore about one more thing, separately before that call. A specific addition to my estate documents. When I told Rosalind what I'd decided, that I was amending my trust to include her, specifically and by name, with a designated portion, she went very quiet in a different way. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to. I wasn't doing it for." "I know that too," I said. "That's exactly why." She didn't argue after that. She's not the kind of person who argues when she knows something is right and true. That was 7 months ago. My son and I have not spoken since. Not really. There was one phone call in late autumn that lasted 4 minutes and ended with neither of us saying anything that moved us forward. I don't know what that relationship becomes from here. I'm not ready to know yet. Cecilia calls every Sunday. She called last Sunday from her kitchen in Portland, and we talked for an hour and a half about nothing important at all. Her garden, a book she was reading, a movie she thought I'd like. At the end, she said, "I love you, Mom," the way she always does, like it's just a fact she wants to confirm. I said it back, because it is. Rosalind came on Monday morning, as usual. She brought me something from her garden, a small paper bag of dried herbs she'd been meaning to give me for weeks. She set it on the counter and asked how my weekend had been. I told her it had been good. She put the kettle on and we talked about ordinary things, the way we always have, in this house with the magnolia tree out front that my husband chose on a Sunday afternoon because it reminded him of someone he'd loved. Some things I've learned are worth protecting, not because they're grand or valuable or impressive, but simply because they're yours, because someone good helped you hold on to them when you almost didn't. I keep coming back to the coat closet, not because it was dramatic, though it was, but because of how small and ordinary it felt in the moment. A wool coat that smelled like my husband, a row of umbrellas, Rosalind's hand finding mine in the dark. That's where it turned. Not in a courtroom, not in a lawyer's office, not in some confrontation with raised voices and slammed doors. It turned in a coat closet at my own birthday party because one person decided that what she overheard was her business, that my well-being was worth more than her comfort, more than the easier choice of walking away. I've thought a lot about what made Rosalind do what she did. She didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have. Most people hear something they shouldn't and they make a quiet decision to unknow it. It's easier. It costs less. She chose differently, and I think she chose that way because of something she simply is. Something built into how she moves through the world. She's a person of genuine integrity. Not the performed kind, not the kind that shows up when there's an audience, the kind that operates in empty hallways when no one is watching. What my son was planning required the opposite of that. It required counting on the fact that I was trusting, that I was aging, that I would not look closely at the papers placed in front of me. He was not wrong that I trusted him. He was wrong to use it the way he did, and I think in some quiet part of himself, he knew the difference. That's not a judgment I make lightly. It's just what I observed in his face on Thursday morning when he walked in and found me already knowing. He didn't look surprised. He looked caught. Being caught is not the same as being changed. I don't know if he has changed. That's his work to do, not mine. What I know is this. I had to think clearly when everything in me wanted to react. Theodore asked me to do nothing until he called back, and I did nothing. Cecilia asked me to wait for her, and I waited. That kind of stillness, holding what you know, protecting it, refusing to move until you understand the ground beneath you. That took something from me I didn't know I had in that quantity. I had always thought of myself as an emotional person, someone who felt things loudly. Sitting at that kitchen table the night of my birthday, drinking water and making deliberate decisions, I found out I was also someone who could be precise when it mattered. I am 65 years old. I am not finished learning who I am. The property in Ashfield is protected now. The accounts are protected, and Rosalind's name is in my trust documents, next to my daughter's, in ink that doesn't come out. Some things I've learned cannot be taken from you if you refuse to sign them away. Not just the legal things, but the deeper ones. Your clarity, your ability to ask for help, your willingness to stand up on a Thursday morning and say, I know, and I'm not signing anything. Those belong to you. They always did.